What happens when two of the most talked about women in entertainment clash on live television in front of millions of viewers? What you're about to witness is one of the most explosive celebrity interviews ever recorded, where pleasantries quickly dissolved into accusations, tears, and a moment that left audiences speechless. This isn't just another celebrity feud. This is raw, unfiltered emotion playing out in real time. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment telling me what you think about this incredible confrontation. The Kelly Clarkson Show was known for its warm, welcoming atmosphere where celebrities felt comfortable sharing their most personal stories. Kelly had built her reputation on being the host who could make anyone feel at home, the one who asked the right questions without crossing lines. But sometimes, even the most experienced hosts find themselves in situations they never saw coming. Meghan Markle walked onto the set that Tuesday afternoon, looking every bit the polished former royal she had become known as. Her navy blue blazer was perfectly tailored, her hair swept back in an elegant low bun, and her smile was the practiced one she had perfected during countless public appearances. The audience applauded warmly as she settled into the plush chair across from Kelly, who greeted her with her trademark enthusiasm. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here today," Kelly said, her voice carrying that genuine warmth that had made her show so successful. "I know you've been incredibly busy with your various projects, and we're just thrilled to have you." "Thank you for having me, Kelly. I've been looking forward to this conversation," Meghan replied, her voice smooth and measured. She crossed her legs elegantly and folded her hands in her lap, every gesture deliberate and camera-ready. Kelly leaned forward slightly, her expression brightening. "I want to start by talking about your new podcast series. You've been very vocal about amplifying women's voices, and I think that's something our audience really connects with. Can you tell us what inspired you to take on this particular project?" Meghan's smile widened, and she seemed to relax slightly. "Absolutely. You know, throughout my life I've encountered so many incredible women whose stories deserved to be heard, women who have overcome tremendous obstacles, who have broken barriers, who have refused to let others define their worth. I realized I had a platform, and I wanted to use it responsibly." "That's beautiful," Kelly nodded, but there was something in her expression that suggested she was building toward something more substantial. "And speaking of using platforms responsibly, I have to ask about some of the comments you made recently. About authenticity in the media, you mentioned that too many people in entertainment are performing versions of themselves rather than being genuine. That's a pretty bold statement." The shift in Meghan's demeanor was subtle but noticeable. Her smile became slightly more fixed, and she tilted her head in that way she did when she was carefully considering her words. "Well, I think authenticity is something we all struggle with, especially in the public eye. There's always pressure to present a certain image, to say the right things, to avoid controversy. But at some point, you have to ask yourself whether you're living your truth or just living up to other people's expectations." Kelly nodded slowly, her fingers drumming lightly on her armrest. "That's interesting because, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but some people have pointed out that your own relationship with authenticity has been, well, complicated. The way you've spoken about your time in the royal family, for instance, has sometimes seemed to change depending on the audience you're addressing." The studio suddenly felt different. The audience, who had been murmuring approvingly, fell silent. Meghan's posture straightened, and her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying, Kelly." "I'm not implying anything," Kelly said, her voice still friendly but firmer now. "I'm just observing that, in your interview with Oprah, you painted a very specific picture of your experiences. But then, in other interviews, some of the details seem to shift. I'm wondering if you can help us understand how that aligns with your message about authenticity." Meghan's hands tightened slightly in her lap, and she leaned back in her chair. "Kelly, I think you're mischaracterizing what I've said. My experiences were my experiences, and I've been consistent in sharing my truth. If others choose to interpret that differently, that's not something I can control. But you can control how you present that truth, can't you?" Kelly pressed, her reporter instincts clearly kicking in. "And when you're advocating for authenticity while simultaneously crafting very specific narratives about your experiences, don't you think that sends mixed messages?" The tension in the studio was palpable now. Meghan's media training was evident, as she maintained her composure, but there was a flash of something sharper in her eyes. I think what sends mixed messages, Kelly, is when people who've never walked in my shoes try to tell me how I should process or share my experiences. I've been transparent about my struggles, about the challenges I faced, about the impact that it had on my mental health. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then perhaps they need to examine why my truth threatens them. Kelly's eyebrows rose slightly. I don't think anyone's threatened by your truth, Meghan. I think people are just trying to understand why your truth seems to have different versions, depending on the setting. That's not about comfort or discomfort. That's about credibility. Credibility. Meghan's voice carried a new edge now, though she was still maintaining her polished exterior. Kelly, I've been scrutinized, analyzed, and questioned about every word I've ever spoken in public. My credibility has been attacked by people who have never experienced what I've experienced, who have never faced the kind of systemic challenges I've faced, so forgive me if I find it interesting that we're having this conversation about my credibility. When there are actual issues in the world that deserve this level of scrutiny, the audience was completely silent now, sensing that something significant was happening. Kelly, however, seemed undeterred. But Meghan, you've put yourself in the public eye. You've chosen to share your story, to build a brand around your experiences. When you do that, don't you think people have a right to ask questions? Don't you think accountability comes with that territory? Meghan's smile had disappeared entirely now, replaced by a look of barely contained frustration. Accountability, Kelly? I've been held accountable for things I never even did. I've been blamed for family dynamics that existed long before I entered the picture. I've been criticized for breathing, for speaking, for staying silent. So when you talk about accountability, I wonder if you're applying that same standard to everyone, or just to me. Kelly's expression hardened at Meghan's challenge about accountability standards. She set down her coffee mug with deliberate care, the small clink audible in the silent studio. Actually, Meghan, I think I do apply the same standards to everyone. I've had difficult conversations with plenty of guests who've made public claims. The difference is, most of them don't deflect every question by claiming they're being unfairly targeted. Deflecting, Meghan's voice rose slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. Kelly, you're sitting here questioning my credibility, my authenticity, my truth, and when I try to provide context for why that might be problematic, you call it deflecting. Do you see the pattern here? The pattern I see, Kelly replied, leaning forward with renewed intensity, is someone who can't give a straight answer to a direct question. I asked you about the inconsistencies in your public statements, and instead of addressing that, you've turned this into a conversation about how unfairly you've been treated. That's literally the definition of deflection. Meghan's hands were no longer folded calmly in her lap. She was gesturing now, her movements becoming more animated. You want a straight answer? Fine. My story hasn't changed, Kelly. My experiences haven't changed. What has changed is my willingness to protect people who never protected me. What has changed is my understanding that staying silent to preserve other people's comfort was slowly killing me. But that's exactly what I'm talking about, Kelly interjected, her voice gaining strength. You say your story hasn't changed, but you've gone from saying you knew very little about the royal family before you married Harry to suggesting you were naive about the institution. You've described your relationship with Catherine as friendly in some interviews and strained in others. You've talked about feeling isolated while simultaneously describing support systems. These aren't different perspectives, Meghan. They're different facts. The color was rising in Meghan's cheeks now, and her voice carried a tremor of genuine emotion. You know what, Kelly? You're right. My story has evolved because my understanding has evolved. When you're living through trauma, when you're trying to survive in an environment that feels hostile, you don't always have the luxury of perfect clarity. You do what you need to do to get through each day. I can understand that, Kelly said, her voice softening slightly. But then why not just say that? Why not say I was confused, I was struggling, I may have misremembered some things, or seen them differently than they actually were? Why maintain that every version of your story is the absolute truth? Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked like pain mixed with anger. Because the moment I admit to any uncertainty, the moment I acknowledge that trauma can affect memory or perception, everything I've said gets dismissed. Every valid concern I've raised gets written off as the confused ramblings of an unstable woman. You know that, Kelly? You're a woman in this industry. You know how quickly we get labeled as emotional or unreliable the second we show any vulnerability. But isn't that exactly what you're doing to me right now? Kelly shot back. I'm asking legitimate questions about public statements you've made, and you're suggesting I'm attacking you because you're a woman? That's not fair, and it's not accurate. Fair. Meghan's voice was getting louder now, and there were tears beginning to form in her eyes. Kelly, do you know what it's like to have your every word dissected, analyzed, and turned against you? Do you know what it's like to have people question whether your mental health struggles were real? Do you know what it's like to be told that your experience of racism was just your imagination? No, I don't know what that's like, Kelly admitted, her voice steady. But I do know what it's like to be held accountable for my actions and my words. And I know what it's like to take responsibility when I've made mistakes instead of blaming everyone else for misunderstanding me. The tears in Meghan's eyes were flowing freely now, and her voice was thick with emotion. You think I haven't taken responsibility? You think I haven't examined my own behavior, my own choices? Kelly, I've spent sleepless nights wondering if I could have done things differently, if I could have been more diplomatic, more patient, more understanding. But at the end of the day, I can't take responsibility for other people's racism. I can't take responsibility for a system that was never designed to accept someone like me. And no one's asking you to? Kelly replied, her voice gentler now, but still firm. But you can take responsibility for how you've handled the aftermath. You can take responsibility for the fact that your public statements have sometimes been contradictory. You can take responsibility for the impact your words have had on other people, including people who can't defend themselves publicly. Meghan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. People who can't defend themselves? Kelly, I was the one who couldn't defend myself for years. I was the one who was told to stay quiet, to smile, to take it. And now that I've found my voice, now that I'm finally speaking up, suddenly I'm the one who's being unfair. Speaking up is important, Kelly acknowledged, but so is speaking truthfully. And when your truth keeps shifting, when your story keeps changing, it makes it harder for people to trust you. It makes it harder for people to take your very real concerns seriously. My truth hasn't shifted, Meghan insisted, her voice breaking slightly. My understanding of my truth has deepened. My willingness to share difficult parts of my truth has grown. But the core of what I experienced, the loneliness, the isolation, the fear, the sense that I was losing myself, that has never changed. Kelly studied Meghan's face, seeing the genuine pain there. I believe that you felt those things, Meghan. I believe that you went through something difficult and traumatic. But I also think you've used that pain to justify some choices that maybe weren't the best choices. And I think you've used that pain to deflect from legitimate questions about your behavior. What behavior? Meghan demanded, her voice rising again. What exactly have I done that's so terrible? I left a situation that was making me sick. I spoke honestly about my experiences. I tried to build a life for myself and my family. Are those really such unforgivable sins? Leaving was understandable, Kelly said quietly. Speaking about your experiences was your right, but speaking about them in ways that seemed calculated to cause maximum damage while positioning yourself as the victim in every scenario. That's where I think you lost some people. Meghan stared at Kelly for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions, hurt, anger, disbelief, and something that looked almost like recognition. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You really think I calculated all of this? You think I planned to have my reputation destroyed? My relationship severed? My mental health questioned? You think I wanted to become one of the most controversial figures in the world? I think you wanted to control the narrative, Kelly said simply, and I think when you realized you couldn't control it completely, you kept adjusting it, trying to find a version that would give you the sympathy and support you felt you deserved. The accusation about controlling the narrative hung in the air like a challenge. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions, as if she was processing not just Kelly's words, but perhaps confronting something she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. About herself, when she finally spoke, her voice was raw and unguarded in a way it hadn't been since the interview began. Control the narrative, she repeated, her voice thick with tears. Kelly, you have no idea what it's like to watch your narrative be written by people who hate you, to have your own family members sell stories about you to the press. So yes, when I finally got the chance to tell my side, Maybe I did try to control it. Maybe I did try to make sure people understood what I went through. But that's exactly my point. Kelly pressed on, her voice gaining momentum. You weren't just telling your side, Meghan. You were crafting a story where you were the innocent victim and everyone else was the villain. And when parts of that story didn't quite fit, you adjusted them. When people questioned you, you made it about racism or sexism or mental health, anything to avoid taking responsibility for your own actions. Meghan's tears were flowing freely now, and her voice cracked as she spoke. You want me to take responsibility? Fine. I take responsibility for believing that love would be enough. I take responsibility for being naive enough to think that if I just worked hard enough, if I just followed the rules, if I just smiled pretty enough, they would accept me. I take responsibility for thinking that my husband's family would protect me the way my own family never did. That's not taking responsibility, Kelly replied, her voice softer but still relentless. That's still making yourself the victim. Taking responsibility would be saying, I made mistakes too. I said things I shouldn't have said. I handled situations poorly. I contributed to the problems in my relationships. But you can't do that, can you? Because in your version of events, you're always the one who was wronged. Because I was wronged, Meghan shot back, her voice breaking completely now. I was a black woman trying to exist in a white institution that has never welcomed people like me. I was dealing with racist coverage in the press, with family members who resented my presence, with a system that wanted me to shrink myself down to nothing. How is any of that my fault? It's not your fault that you faced racism, Meghan. It's not your fault that the press treated you unfairly. It's not your fault that some people couldn't accept you because of your race. But it is your fault how you chose to respond to all of that. And it is your fault that you've used those very real injustices to shield yourself from any criticism. Of your behavior, shield myself. Meghan's voice rose to almost a shout. Kelly, I have been eviscerated in the press for years. I have been called every name in the book. I have had my character, my intelligence, my motives questioned by millions of people. How exactly have I been shielded from criticism? You've been shielded from accountability, Kelly clarified. Every time someone questions your actions, you make it about race. Every time someone points out inconsistencies in your story, you make it about mental health. Every time someone suggests you might have handled something differently, you make it is about being a victim. You've made it impossible for anyone to hold you accountable for anything without being labeled as racist or cruel. Meghan stared at Kelly through her tears, her breathing uneven. You think I use my pain as a weapon? I think you use your pain as a shield, Kelly replied quietly. And I think you've gotten so good at it that you might not even realize you're doing it anymore. The studio was completely silent, except for the sound of Meghan's quiet sobs. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. When she finally looked up, her makeup was streaked, her composure completely gone. Maybe you're right, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Maybe I have been so focused on protecting myself that I stopped seeing how my words might hurt other people. Maybe I have been so determined to be believed that I stopped questioning whether everything I believed was entirely accurate. Kelly's expression softened slightly. That's all anyone wanted to hear, Meghan. Not that you were perfect, not that you never made mistakes, just that you were human enough to acknowledge when you might have gotten something wrong. But if I admit that I might have been wrong about some things, Meghan continued, her voice gaining strength through her tears, then people will say I was lying about everything. They'll say the racism wasn't real, the mental health struggles weren't real, the loneliness wasn't real, and those things were real. Kelly, whatever mistakes I made, whatever inconsistencies there might have been in how I told my story, the pain was real. The pain being real doesn't make the inconsistencies okay, Kelly said gently. And acknowledging the inconsistencies doesn't make the pain less real. They can both be true at the same time. Meghan nodded slowly, wiping her eyes again. I think I got so caught up in making sure people believed me that I stopped being completely honest, even with myself. Why? Kelly asked. Why was it so important that everyone believe you? Meghan was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Because I spent most of my life feeling like nobody believed me. My father's family didn't believe me when I told them about the racism I experienced. The press didn't believe me when I tried to correct false stories, even if it wasn't completely true, Kelly pressed. even if it wasn't completely fair, Meghan corrected, her voice steadying. I think I told the truth, as I experienced it, but I think I was so focused on being seen as the victim that I didn't leave room for the possibility that other people might have been victims too. That maybe we were all just trying to survive in a difficult situation. Kelly studied Meghan's face, seeing something different there now. Do you think you can find a way to tell your story that doesn't require everyone else to be the villain? Meghan considered this for a moment. I don't know, she said honestly. I've been telling this version of the story for so long that I'm not sure I remember how to tell it any other way. But maybe that's what I need to figure out. The two women sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling. Between them, finally, Kelly spoke. I think people would respect you more if you could admit when you're not sure. When you might have been wrong, when you're still figuring things out. Nobody expects you to be perfect, Meghan, but they do expect you to be honest. I thought I was being honest, Meghan replied quietly. But maybe I was just being truthful about my feelings without being honest about the whole situation. What's the difference, Kelly asked. My feelings were real, Meghan explained, but they weren't the only reality. Other people had feelings too. Other people were hurt too. Other people were trying to navigate the same impossible situation I was. I think I forgot that. As the interview drew to a close, both women seemed emotionally drained but somehow lighter, as if something important had been said and heard. The confrontation that had started with accusations and defensiveness had ended with something that looked almost like understanding. The raw emotion, the tears, the moment of breakthrough. It was television that would be talked about for years to come, not because it was comfortable or easy to watch, but because it was real in a way that celebrity interviews rarely are. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Kelly go too far? Or was this the kind of honest conversation we need more of in celebrity culture? Subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think Meghan should do next to rebuild her credibility and public trust.